Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. And this is a book that I think has already had quite a lot of buzz kind of coming before it was released and since it's been released. And I see why. I'm going to be talking a little bit about it in this review. The first part will be spoiler free as much as I can, and I'll go into some spoilers a little bit later. But for the most part, it will be relatively spoiler free because I think just sort of as an overall project, I think the book is really successful, and that's more what I want to talk about, I guess. So let's get started. So the book, as the name suggests, is a sort of, not necessarily an adaptation, but more of a sort of response or a kind of riff on David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. And in that book, in Charles Dickens's book, the whole idea is that David Copperfield is this young man born into quite difficult circumstances, sort of passes between various families for a while, and is sort of a bit of an underdog story where he comes through at the end and is able to make the most of kind of his circumstances and kind of thrive in a society that would have otherwise been fairly hostile to him. But in the meantime, he is also this character who's growing and finding his sense of self. He's meeting a cast of characters who've either been very fortunate in life or who have not been, and they sort of end up somewhere in this sort of vague social hierarchy in a way that is quite tricky. And I think what is particularly skillful and clever about what Barbara Kingsolver does here is modernizing it in a way that doesn't feel cliched, at least to me. So I think it would have been very easy to just modernize it by just moving the dates a bit and by still having a sort of similar circumstance, just with some of the window dressing changed. And I think what's really quite clever is actually she I feel is making more of a point. So she uses this original story as a starting point to talk a little bit more deeply about some quite big issues in modern day in America and sort of, broadly as well, but particularly focused on the US. And so, for example, right from the beginning, we meet Demon, born as Damon, but there's a whole sort of mythology essentially behind how he comes to get his name, and he is the one telling the story in this very sort of accented English, I guess, for want of a better word. It's told in a sort of dialect. It's not in that way where it's really incomprehensible. In some ways, it feels like it does a lot of what Dickens often does very well, which is to give a character a local or regional identity. And in most cases with Dickens, not overdo it. So, kind of give them a subtlety where it feels like we've tuned into how they speak. I listened to the audiobook of this, which obviously helped. And it's sort of, he's from the south of the US. And I sort of said in my weekly wrap up recently, but I think I got a little confused at first because he is... I kept on thinking for some reason that because it's a historical fiction thing in the sense of, well, it could have been historical fiction because it's taken from Charles Dickens. My brain automatically went to it being somewhere else in the past in the US, whereas it's meant to be the 90s. And so he talks about the Spice Girls and he talks about Tamagotchis. But I think my brain kind of couldn't quite compute that. And I kept on imagining this was in the sort of 50s or 60s. Anyway, that's on me. That's not in the book. Like the book is not telling you that. I think I heard a Southern US accent sort of told in a very sort of catcher in the rye kind of style, and assumed that we're in that same time period. Anyway, that's on me. But what I think is really clever is Barbara Kingsolver then takes that regional identity, that local identity of who he is, and uses it to address some really major problems happening in the US. So, for example, Oxycontin, the drug that was used initially as a sort of pain relief for many people, but it became very clear quite early on that it was highly addictive. It was also so effective at reducing pain that people became really quite dependent on it, and without having any time, without having a sort of steady flow of it necessarily, because if supplies got quite limited, it became an issue. it meant that people suddenly had this really difficult choice of feed this addiction and continue taking this drug that was alleviating so much of their pain, or go without and essentially live in this really painful, tricky existence that was not really feasible. And so often, where there were large instances of oxy being prescribed, we often also had a lot of people who went on to become incredibly dependent, and that potentially led in some places to crime, because people were robbing or stealing either the medication itself or money to get more of that medication. And all of this is a bit of a seems like a bit of an odd context or backstory. I mean, actually, I would recommend Empire of Pain by Patrick Radden Keefe, which I think is a fantastic book at looking at the oxy problem. But that, I think, is a useful bit of backstory to a lot of what this book does. So, for example, we find out quite early on in the book that part of the reason that Demon has had such a tricky early life is that there is a history of addiction within his family, and particularly with his mother. We learn very early on that is going to be a sort of a big part of it. Sort of shapes a lot of the world around him. It's kind of part of the reason that he grows up in difficult circumstances, because he is in a family that is maybe not always able to look after him. But equally, something like addiction often is quite prevalent in some communities where they don't have other resources, not because of any sort of failings necessarily on those people, but just because there aren't the resources or the infrastructure or what have you to really support people who are going through it. And so we get that kind of sense quite early on that Demon is part of this context. He's a child who was brought up in amongst these circumstances that he's not been able to control, as with his mother, and as with David Copperfield. And so therefore we kind of know that he's sort of been dealt a bad hand at the beginning, and this is sort of part of his story to then sort of overcome. And I think where Demon then really goes next is to really explore that in a really human way. I think what I really appreciated about Barbara Kingsolver's writing in this book is, I think, again, it would have been very easy to fall into that easy trap that many writers have when writing about working class people or people suffering from addiction, of either it tends to fall into sort of similar camps of either glorifying this sort of valiant working class, really pushing through even despite all of this this thing, in a way that is quite patronizing, of sort of like, well done you, or the opposite, where it sort of paints working class life as this tricky, gritty thing that is basically Oscar bait for a movie, right? And I think what Barbara Kingsolver does really effectively here is take this initial story and give the characters in the story space to breathe. And there are loads of characters here, and probably too many to name, many of whom are also named after characters in David Copperfield. And so you've just got this really beautiful array of fantastic characters who also really humanize parts of the way we talk about poverty and addiction and cycles of discrimination, or cycles of marginalization. And I think that's what's really beautiful here, is she has taken in some ways part of the core message of David Copperfield, which is to have this sort of working class hero, this sort of underdog, and continue to put it in a modern day American context, but also not fall into the traps of how current narratives often operate around it. So, Demon is brilliant and funny and also flawed, and he can be quite prickly, and he's a difficult character, but he's also kind of wonderful, and he's got a great range of people around him, but he also just cuts people off occasionally. And so you've got this really interesting, complicated set of people in the book, and I think that probably partly explains why it's fairly long, because I think you do have this big book full of this almost this giant ensemble cast, all showing various sides of it. So, for example, even there are discussions of sexuality in a way that I think is done very sensitively, of kind of characters trying to work out who they are, trying to find their places within the world. We've got his sort of love interest, and I don't want to spoil much on that, but we've got his love interest where he is wonderfully oblivious about her existence, or about what that might, not necessarily her existence, but how that might come to be between the two of them. And so as a result, there's this, all of these very human bits that I think are what Dickens does so well are really brought to the fore by Barbara Kingsolver, I think, as well. She, I feel, has captured the heart of that original book and done something really interesting with it, which is to take it further and look at it through a modern day context. There's also something quite scary about the fact that David Copperfield and Demon Copperhead, with, you know, a good amount of time between them, often tell a very similar story about where people are in society and how the most sort of marginalized in society are kept in various parts of that marginalization by the systems that sort of govern us. And so it's really interesting that that she's sort of taken that angle and kind of allowed it to be a political, fiery, angry novel, but in a way that mostly focuses on the human. And I think that's where its real strength is. And as I'm realizing as I'm doing this, I'm not even necessarily sure if I want to go to a spoiler section, because actually I think that is the majority of what I want to say about this book. I think it's something to be enjoyed and savoured and explored. I listened to an audiobook of it, which I think did work really well for me, but I think also just the on paper experience, I think, is also going to be a gorgeous one, of really spending time with this huge cast of characters and just letting the story and the humanity of it all wash over you. I've been Bod Booker, talking about this book. I hope you enjoy it. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.